Board has and monitors on a recurring basis. Project funding through August, as I mentioned earlier, is roughly $1.1 billion, about 57% of the project's total overall. Stadium Authority finances, room tax collections in FY 2019 ended the fiscal year at $49.5 million, about 1.9% higher than the year 2018. We were actually projecting off budgeted numbers. What happened is after the result of the final period there, we had substantial decrease in revenues in the early periods of fiscal 18 as a result of the events of 1 October.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't 1 October, folks.
Which we were budgeting off of.
Not true.
The slightly lower the slightly lower actuals than expected performance when we compare against the budget from the prior year. But in FY 2019, the $49.5 million were sufficient enough and certainly exceeded the amount required to meet the debt service obligation, which was $33 million for that year. Because the $33 million was met, the waterfall then takes place. That amount of money was sufficient to reach the full debt reserve contribution of $9 million for that year. And then there's an additional $5.4 million that flows through the balance of the waterfall for the Stadium Authority Board. In addition to that, there's a roughly $1 million, about $1.1 million of unspent operating revenue that the Stadium Authority Board has that will also flow in from FY 2019, meaning that we expect to be about $6 to $6.5 million of funds available to flow through the balance of the waterfall for the Stadium Authority Board. Once everything is the accounting is fully closed out and the audit is completed, those transfers will actually take place. The debt reserve itself currently stands at $53.8 million, about 60% of the $90.2 million two-year target for the Stadium Authority Board. We will add to that roughly $9 million, taking it to about $17.6 million in total for the second year reserve. That'll take it up to about 70% of the total target once the full accounting once the accounting is closed out and all the final transfers are made. In addition to that, there have been a number of additional staff activities. The audit is underway, as I just alluded to, closing out FY 2019. It started in middle of this month. We expect it to be completed and brought back to the Stadium Authority Board in November. Vendor communications, I know that's always a question that comes up. We have more than 800 vendors that have identified themselves as having interest in the stadium and job opportunities that are there. With the announcement of AEG being the stadium manager, there's been a fair amount of questions that have surfaced as a result of that. We sent an update to the stadium, to those folks that have expressed interest in being a vendor at the stadium, letting them know that AEG is continuing to establish its protocol for vendor procurement and that we're continuing to coordinate with them. And as more information becomes available, we will also provide that to them as well. The second half of that, of course, is that the stadium concessionaire continues to be a work in progress. Our understanding is that that is continuing to get very, very close and that an announcement is imminent. When that takes place, we will make sure that not only the Stadium Authority Board is informed about that, but the vendors that are also interested are informed of that as well. The waterfall distribution, I mentioned just a moment ago, the distribution of waterfall funds for FY 2019. We also were able to finalize everything for the waterfall for FY 2018. There were an additional $352,000 that were not unspent in the prior year. That is the cash balance that actually existed in the Stadium Authority's accounts, minus any outstanding accounts payable. Those have been transferred, as well as interest earnings from debt proceeds from the bond debt that exists has also been transferred all to the reserve account as required by all the project documents. PSL purchase and sales continue to take place. Chairman Hill approved 2 upsized purchases, one of $31.8 million in accordance with Section 2.01C of the PSL Purchase and Sales Agreement. To date, the PSL upsized purchases total $64.7 million, and the PSL program currently stands at $355 million. We've received the second quarter information in terms of reporting for the PSL programs. As reported earlier, continues to well exceed expectations. We expect it to continue to do so through the completion of that program. Funding notice reconciliations, as I mentioned earlier, 18 have been processed. We continue to work through those. The new system of working through that with the accounting firm that the Stadium Authority Board retained, as well as the process with Clark County, has been remarkably smooth over the past couple of months. Continue to review those. That process is working as expected. The liens that created some confusion early on in the process no longer do so. That process continues to be underway and working as expected.
What does that mean?
Mr. Chairman, that's an update of where we've been over the past couple of months. If there's any questions about those items or additional direction, I'd be more than happy to answer the questions and take the additional.
Yeah, ask the questions.
Questions for Jeremy?
Yeah, I can ask any.
Mr. Chair, just one. Jeremy, the PSLs, is that money in the bank or commitments?
It's both. There are cash dollars that are coming through. That is the first money that is utilized and goes to the unreleased account. Those are cash that they can use to essentially defease the debt that they're taking on or use toward their portion of it. In addition to that, they also have the ability to take money in excess of those, essentially as a bridge loan that's given by Bank of America. They have about $22 million that's outside of that has been taken, that where there is not cash available as of yet, but those are the dollars that Bank of America gives them the ability to do that. The $355 million that I talked about before, about $330 million of that is actually cash that's been received.
And I'll just kind of reiterate what one point that Jeremy made, and we'll deal with this every year, and every time we get a report like this, you'll have money building up in the waterfall account that has not yet been transferred. So when we look at year 2 of the debt service reserve showing 8.6 million, that is prior to the transfer of the 9 million. So functionally, at the end of June, we had collected enough that once the transfer is made on paper, that number will be 17.6 million. We're in the process of generating room tax money for the waterfall as we go through this year. That transfer will be on top of that 17.6 million. So, any other questions? Okay, does that wrap up item 6?
Yes, sir, it does.
Okay, we'll move on to agenda item 7 then.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Agenda item number 7 is the update on the community benefits plan. The Community Benefits Oversight Committee will meet next on October 17th. The latest data that's provided in terms of the community benefits plan is currently through July of 2019. The brief answer here is that every target is being met or exceeded. 21% small business enterprise participation. You'll recall that the target is 15%. Approximately $231 million committed to SBE firms. 53 women and minority businesses have been awarded about $50 million in work. 71% of all firms working on the project are currently Nevada-based. Workforce participation at 62% minority or female, 2% veteran, again, well exceeding the requirements as set forth in the community benefits plan. In addition to that, Mr. Chairman, the most recent update would indicate that total work hours on the project are now estimated at roughly 2.4 million. These are folks actually working physically on the site through July. So again, hitting every mark that's there. If there's anything further, I'll certainly defer to Mr. Evans as the chair of that committee, but we look forward to continued updates and continue to bring them here.
Mr. Evans?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Agrell. Very positive report and update. In addition to that, I want to thank you, Mr. Agrell, as well as Mr. Haynes, for getting an update done. One of the things I'd asked at the last meeting was to have some type of correspondence to the individuals that had registered great to see there's 800 plus out there in the universe, if you will. Better still, glad that they're getting some kind of communication on both the recent selection of AEG for the master operator, as well as an update regarding the master concessionaire. So thank you all very much. Everything's very positive so far, and I'm sure it'll continue that way.
One note, we're looking at it on our project at the LBCVA, and the effect of some of these programs is that we are turning small businesses into non-small businesses as we move forward. So the universe is shrinking a little bit. Okay, agenda item 8, welcome Mr. Webb to the podium. Morning.
Good morning. In a minute, we'll play a drone video of the stadium progress, but let me just begin with some opening remarks. With 321 days remaining until the scheduled substantial completion, and despite a challenging schedule from the very beginning, we remain on track for an on-time completion. Earlier it was referred, Jeremy referred to the JLL report as characterizing the schedule as somewhat aggressive. From my perspective, it would have to relax considerably to become somewhat aggressive. Construction is more than 65% complete. The work's proceeding, as Jeremy mentioned, somewhat on a 6-day-a-week schedule, depending on the particular trade, and as determined each week based upon progress that's observed in the field. There is a substantial second shift, and we expect the night shift work to intensify in October to allow the remaining 800 segments of the lower precast concrete seating bowl to be installed. Those are about 800 individual pieces and represent the final 19 to 28 rows of seats, depending on where they're installed in the building. Those will, the installation of those will be taking place once the cable net steel structure is raised to about 100 feet of the approximately 200 feet where it eventually will rest. Once it's up at that 100-foot level, we'll be able to move cranes in beneath that, and on a second shift when the cable net is not being hoisted, install the remaining seating bolts, concrete seating treads. Currently, our daily construction workforce is slightly over 1,600 people on the site, and we are onboarding workers at a rate of about 200 each week as trades turn over. Let's start with the drone here for a second. Since this video was shot, the canopy roof has been closed in and the stadium's name has been announced, although we haven't updated the original architectural rendering, something I'm sure Allegiant Airlines would appreciate and we'll take care of shortly. Once the erection of the structural steel was completed and supports for the canopy removed, the roof settled about 5¼ inches, which is almost exactly the settlement predicted by the project engineers. With the completion of the canopy roof, the process of installing nearly 500,000 square feet of exterior glazing has begun. You can see the very beginnings of this process at the bottom of the building, just to the right of that Raiders logo, amidst the phalanx of hydraulic man lifts involved in the glass installation. Although the design has been refined during the 2 years since it was produced, the final results illustrated in this early rendering are beginning to emerge in the field. You can actually see it take place. If you look closely through where the huge lanai doors will be installed, you can see the opening of the floor through which the torch will pass from the main entrance level below and continue 85 feet upward. That rectangular frame on the ground in the lower left is one of the lanai door panels being assembled in preparation for the door installation. I've spoken about the canopy roof and how precise it needs to be. The roof itself also serves as the tension ring for the attachment of the 100 stainless steel cables that support the translucent roof, the ETFE roof. This perimeter roof has a circumference of more than a half a mile and an area of 320,000 square feet. And as I've described to you previously, it has a design precision which is exceptionally demanding in order for the cables to properly attach. And in the foreground, you can see that we've reduced the number of hoist cranes from the 17 at the peak down to 4 remaining on the site, and that's a fairly noticeable sign of progress. Just disassembling and removing one of those cranes, by the way, is in and of itself a big job. The last one that went out took 37 tractor trailers to transport it off the site. Can I bring up this PowerPoint now? Great. From the outside, especially in the daylight, the exterior glass wall looks quite black by intent, but from the inside looking out, there's quite a different effect. Yeah. Kind of strange inverted camera angle there. I can't take responsibility for the fisheye. At the moment, the event floor is really a matrix of stainless steel cabling laid out in preparation for being lifted into place and attached to the canopy. From this distance, the cables don't look very imposing, but when raised 200 feet above to support the roof, they'll become even less visually obvious, and that's by intent. They're a great deal more understandable when seen up close with something like a Coke can to give you a sense of the scale. The cables were manufactured in Switzerland and were each pre-stressed with a load of 620,000 pounds each. That's the equivalent of hanging 200 automobiles at the end of the cable in order to pre-tension that cable so that when it's installed, it is installed with its fully stressed limit. As I've said before, the tolerances on the longest cable, which is about 700 feet, must be within 7/8 of an inch on either side in order for it to fit properly. Even from the drone's video, it's difficult to see the interior finish work, which is already well underway throughout the concourses and the event level of the stadium. Even though the building's exterior walls and roof have not yet enclosed the structure, interior partitions and tile work and finishes and even casework and ceilings are being completed inside the stadium. And this is an example of how we're able to make up some of the delays, roughly 60 days delay in steel installation, by taking what normally would be done after the building was fully encased, fully closed in, and doing that work out of typical sequence. There are risks associated with that, obviously.
Sure as hell
driving
are.
rain, some of this may be damaged, but we've taken mitigation efforts in order to minimize that chance, and selected materials and locations where those materials are installed so that they'd be less vulnerable. As Jeremy mentioned, the project remains on budget. Through the current funding disbursement that we're currently processing, we've spent a bit more than $1.1 billion. The public sector funding contribution represents about 37% of that, with the remainder made up by Stadco and the Raiders. Today, as your agenda indicates, I'd like to talk about some budget changes. All of this is good news, and they fall into 3 general drivers behind what we propose to increase the budget. First of all, there are enhancements and improvements to the building. There are added marketing costs, and then there's costs associated with sponsorship activation. As I previously reported, sales of suites, club seats, PSLs, and sponsorships have outperformed our budgeted expectations. 2 months ago, Stadco and the Raiders contributed a portion of that additional sales revenue as a source of funding to add about $40 million worth of enhancements to the building. At that time, I indicated that we were evaluating a list of additional potential building enhancements. These improvements fall into a half dozen general categories, which you see before you right now, in total about $70 million. First of all, they are are such things as upgrading suites and adding furniture, fixtures, and equipment such as the consoles shown here in the low seating sections, building out unassigned space in several areas within the stadium, especially on the event level, space that was not programmed for any particular use and would have essentially been entombed for some future use. We're able to build it out now and take advantage of it while the contractors, and take advantage of the economies of scale while the contractors are on site. And put that
Mr.
space
Webb,
to,
Let me just
yeah.
officially open agenda item 13 concurrently with agenda item 8 so that we can talk about this
All right,
in that agenda item as well. I just did. Go
go ahead. All right. So we'll build out that unassigned space, especially at the event level. In addition to that, we have a number of food service equipment related upgrades, both in the main commissary as well as additional portable food service carts throughout the stadium. The increases reflected to the budget, the $70 million, to cover these enhancements do not represent cost overruns, but are instead deliberate stadium enhancements, which are made possible by additional funding realized through better than budgeted sales results. And these upgrades are being funded solely by Stadco and the Raiders, with not a dime coming from the public. Yet these upgrades will enhance the building, which is owned by the public after all, and this budget revision will actually reduce the size of the public funding contribution as a percentage of the total project costs. Undertaking these building enhancements now, rather than at some future time, allows us to take advantage of the economies of scale with the minimum disruption during construction. A second driver for this is added marketing expenses. This is actually a cost overrun, but it's the sort of cost overrun that every business should envy, since it's caused by better than expected sales results. It would be analogous to an automobile manufacturer exceeding the budgeted amount for steel purchases in a year because they've sold more automobiles than they expected. So we've sold more product, and as a result, the sales costs associated with that product have gone up marginally. This increase is approximately $20 million, and again, is being contributed by Stadco and the Raiders and not the public. The third driver of this overall budget adjustment that we propose to you is due to sponsorship activation. Thus far, Stadco and the Raiders have concluded more than a dozen major stadium sponsorship agreements, such as Allegiant and others. This is an ongoing process, and we expect the number of sponsors to continue to grow throughout the remainder of the stadium construction schedule. Sponsorship activation typically involves things such as the installation of signage, the provision of equipment or fixtures, changes to the finishes within the designated area, technology enhancements, and other physical changes to the stadium.
So, Mr. Webb, I'm going to open agenda item 12 while
Thank
you're at
you.
it. Just, if you want me to open the entire
Yeah,
agenda.
it's a stream of consciousness with me, I'm sorry. These activation costs are generally borne by the respective sponsor and may range from very little, almost nothing actually, to as much as $10 million per individual sponsor. We anticipate that the total costs of third-party sponsorships, the activation costs and similar expenses, will range from between $25 million and $70 million once all the dust settles. Such costs involve absolutely no funding to be provided by the Stadium Authority. We intend to have this work generally performed through the design-build contract, although there may be exceptions to that. And therefore, we propose that the cost of such sponsorship activation improvements, as well as the funding for such work provided by third parties, be reflected in the project budget. This would obviously result in ongoing changes to the project budget, since amounts will change from week to week as new sponsorship agreements are reached. Given the intensity of the schedule and the limited time remaining until construction completion, it's impractical to delay implementation of sponsorship activation work in order to have the Stadium Authority approve each such budget change. And bear in mind that even the largest single sponsorship is projected to be less than 0.5% of the total overall project budget, and after all, would be funded by a third party. However, we're prepared to inform the Stadium Authority as such changes to the project budget are made, consistent with a concurrent approval process, which I hope you're going to take up later. I'd be happy to pause there and then continue with my stream of consciousness on parking and infrastructure, if there are questions.
Jeremy, I think it may make sense for us to just deal with agenda items 12 and 13 now, rather than having to double back and refresh everybody on them. What we have in mind today, and the way the agreement works roughly, and Jeremy can add to this if it's helpful, in order to approve additional expenditures in the budget, we also have to have a commensurate revenue stream that is identified and we know is completely solid. We weren't sure whether the commitment on behalf of B of A would be available for this meeting today for the $90 million budget enhancement that Mr. Webb is proposing. I don't believe that we've received it this morning. So what we will be asking for is a contingent approval of the expansion of the budget with the authority for me to execute that budget enhancement once we have the written commitment that's both approved by Jeremy as well as Mark Arnold to go forward. The same type of structure is what we will also be asking for in terms of the activation enhancements to the budget, because there will be organizations that will be paying for that work as third parties. Will need to verify that revenue is available and then approve the budget enhancement as we move forward. So I don't know if you want to add to that, Jeremy, but feel free to do so.
No, sir, Mr. Chairman, I think you had it exactly right.
So let's work through agenda item 13 first, which is the revised project budget of adding $90 million to the budget. I have one question, Mr. Webb. The report that we received from our staff from August of 2019 says that the contingency for the project is now 3.8% of the remaining spend. In the budget enhancement, you proposed an additional $12 million, which will take it back up over 5% of the remaining spend. Is that the purpose of that contingency, and is the intent to keep it at an amount 5% or above as we work down through the end of the project?
I would not say that our intent is specifically to keep it at any specific percentage of the remaining work. We're taking a look at all of the exposures that we or the contractor can identify and peg a dollar to those exposures, associate a risk factor to each one of those, and try to reserve funds sufficient to cover that. There are two forms of contingency. One is the developer-controlled contingency, and the second is the contractor-controlled contingency. And within each one of the subcontracts, there are obviously subcontractor-controlled contingencies as well. So when we refer to the total contingency on the project, we're overlooking subcontractor contingencies as well. The difference between the developer contingency, which we control, and the contractor contingency is we're less concerned about the contractor's contingency at this point. After all, we have a guaranteed maximum price on a fully designed building that has been fully bought out. The term is in the industry is bought out, which means that each subcontract for all of the work has been concluded. So the need for the contractor contingency is less of a concern to us because, frankly, if they exhaust their contingency, they're still on the hook for delivering the complete project within the guaranteed maximum price. Our contingency is not really pegged at a percentage, as I've indicated, and it takes into consideration kind of vagaries that may have a regulatory impact, a tariff impact, and other impacts.
At some level of contingency, I think we ought to have a conversation about, how low they go and how quickly they go there, but understand the point. Any other questions on the budget for Mr. Webb?
For your convenience, by the way, the proposed reflected format with dollars updated through today is on your screen.
Come on, ask them about the revised budget.
If there's no further discussion, I'd entertain a motion to approve the increase in the budget by $90 million, contingent upon both legal counsel, staff, and chair approval of the associated revenue sources.
Ken Evans, second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you. We'll move back to agenda item 12, which is the ability to expand the budget due to third-party activation work and the associated revisions to the stadium, with the same caveat that this would become a function that is requires the approval of legal counsel, staff, and the chair. But once we see that the revenue is there, then we would administratively enhance the budget for the stadium, and then each stadium authority board meeting we would report back on the budget enhancements that have been approved. Yeah.
This is a question.
Mr. Chairman, for the record, this is Jeremy Aguero. There is no specific line item specifically laying those out. As Mr. Webb alluded to a moment ago, these are things that they know are in process, but there aren't specifics for as of this date.
Can't hear the question.
Any questions along the lines of agenda item 12?
Maybe just to double down on this. So the 20 million you were talking about in sponsorship activation activity is in that number?
No. I mentioned between 25 and 70 million.
Okay.
I also mentioned that the largest single sponsorship activation cost would probably be on the order of less than $10 million.
And so remind me again, where is that in all these numbers?
It's not shown because it's not known yet. I'm trying to lay out the case for why we need a mechanism to approve this in advance. Let me just reiterate a few things. First of all, this is enhancements to the stadium driven by sponsorship activation. So naming rights, for instance, which comes with it an obligation to put signage on the building, or maybe the name of a club to enhance the club. And the funds for accomplishing that are coming from the sponsor out of the sponsorship agreement. We could do this through a separate agreement with Mortenson McCarthy or some other contractor, a signage contractor, directly contract with them, or assign that obligation to the sponsor itself to contract with. We don't think that's the most orderly way to do this. We think the most orderly way and the most efficient way would be to run most of this work through the design-build agreement. Since it would be a change to the design-build agreement, it would need to be reflected in the project budget, which you all are privy to. But since those changes would be ongoing, maybe even weekly during certain periods, and involve a relatively de minimis amount of money, 100%, which would be contributed from sources outside of the stadium authority, it seems appropriate and probably responsible to set up a mechanism whereby this could be approved in advance, or a system for these approvals to take place, rather than wait every other month when you meet and come back and say, we have this sponsorship agreement, they're contributing this amount of money, this is what it's going to accomplish.
Makes sense? Okay. Other questions? Okay, great. Then I would entertain a motion to approve a process whereby once legal counsel, staff, and the chair are shown and have agreed that revenue is available for third-party activation work, that the chair has the ability to approve that work and add it to the stadium's budget, with the additional caveat that any action on along those lines would be reported at the next meeting of the Stadium Authority Board.
I'll move for approval of such a process.
Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you.
I'd like to cover two more topics before my stream of consciousness runs dry. First is parking. In addition to the changes in the project budget, which you
So I'm going to
just-
open agenda item 9.
9? Okay.
Yeah.
In addition to the project budget changes that you've just acted upon, you have before you eventually to consider a lease with the county for county-owned property and related sublease of that property to Stadco. This property is intended to be used for remote shuttle-based, shuttle-supported stadium event parking. The cost of preparing the site, as well as the operating expenses, would be borne by Stadco or an affiliated entity. Our intention is that none of these costs would be ultimately borne by the Stadium Authority, nor would such costs be included in the stadium development budget. This is an ongoing operating expense that I would characterize as a capital lease. As an operating lease. Remote shuttle-supported parking is one of several key elements, and the transportation and parking plan being developed by Stadco and the Raiders. And finally, I was asked to summarize where we are on public infrastructure. I believe I have a slide here. I've updated the status summary of the public infrastructure improvements, which I shared with the board back in its May 23rd meeting. Of the nearly $30 million budgeted for improvements to public sewers, roadways, and similar public infrastructure, we've either completed or have contracts in place with the construction work underway for all but a couple. The two remaining being the pedestrian-related components of that. And as I said, this totals approximately $30 million. Happy to answer any further questions.
No
Additional
question.
Mr. Hornbuckle?
Yeah, just one, Don, the, what do we call them? The stanchions that are protecting people on sidewalks.
Bollocks.
Bollards. I should know this. I paid a lot for these as well. Is that coming over Hacienda? Have you made an agreement?
No, the plan is not to use bollards on Hacienda because of the structural nature of that bridge, but to put concrete barrier on the north side to barricade off and widen sidewalk.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. DeBrey?
I was looking at that the other day. Are you talking about Hacienda just going west, that you're going to put those barricades temporarily, day of the game, and then they can walk forward, but the cars going west can proceed, or is it totally going to be shut down?
There's an extended conversation occurring between MGM, ourselves, and the county as to exactly how the pedestrian experience, which we expect to accommodate between 25 and 30,000 people on a typical Raiders game, from the strip to the stadium. That conversation involves design elements which haven't been finalized yet, and a negotiation with the county on how this is going to be used. I expect this will come before the not only the Department of Public Works, but the Board of County Commissioners next month, and we'll probably have more details for you on that I frankly prefer not to go into in a public session.
Thank you.
Other questions? Stream run dry yet?
No. Stop.
Okay.
No
Thank you,
questions?
Mr. Webb. Appreciate it.
How about the parking budget cost? What?
Okay, we'll open
Oh.
agenda item 10. I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Graham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Agenda item number 10 is to review, potentially approve, and authorize the chairman to sign a lease agreement, including any non-substantive revisions between Clark County and the Clark County Stadium Authority for stadium parking on approximately 19.16 acres of Clark County Development of Aviation property located generally at Las Vegas Boulevard South and Warm Springs Road, and including parcel numbers 177-05-801-003, 011, 012, 024, 025, 026, and 027, all of which are shown on your screen here, make it a little easier, for an initial term of 2 years and an annual rent of $776,186.50 with annual renewals, and authorize the chairman to exercise renewal notices. Mr. Chairman, on tab 10 within your binders is the provision of that lease. It's relatively extensive. I'd be happy to walk through sort of the key elements of it, although I think Mr. Webb walked through those relatively well. The expectation is that there's a 19-acre parcel. That parcel would be used for parking. All of the responsibilities for operating that parcel would be Stadco responsibilities. The Stadium Authority Board is facilitating that in terms of its ability to execute such a lease and enter into a sublease or licensing agreement with Stadco to facilitate that property being put to that specific use. In accordance with the traditional approach for the Stadium Authority Board, this item is placed upon your agenda to provide maximum flexibility for the Stadium Authority Board, but it's the recommendation of staff that the discussions that continue between Clark County, the Stadium, Stadco, and the Stadium Authority Board continue to perfect this lease and then ultimately bring that back to the Stadium Authority Board to be executed and move forward, at least for consideration of that action by this board, Mr. Chairman. The provisions continue to be relatively straightforward in terms of the rent, as leasing this property for this specific purpose. A lot of parties have provided input into that, including all the required and requisite indemnifications that are required. Mr. Arnold, the Stadium Authority Board's external counsel, is listening to us on the phone right now and has had the opportunity to go through that and continues to work with both lawyers for Stadco as well as for Clark County to make sure that gets as close to perfect as possible. It'd be the expectation that staff would bring this lease back to the Stadium Authority Board no later than your scheduled November meeting.
Any questions for Mr. Graham? Mr. Evans?
Yeah, Mr. Grill, thank you very much. Just so we have this site, should I anticipate that there will be other sites that we will need to identify and then negotiate similar agreements for?
Mr. Evans, I don't think there's any doubt that with essentially 320 days remaining in this project, there are going to be a number of these type of transactions that come forward and will be before the Stadium Authority Board. At least that's what Stadco has certainly suggested to us. So some of them will be specific to parking. There will be others that are necessary as the responsibilities and right of the public as the owner of that asset.
With respect to land, the ability for the Stadium Authority to contract with Clark County is streamlined versus what it would be for Stadco and the Raiders. So that's why we are the middle organization between the county and Stadco and the Raiders. So for a private parcel, that would be unlikely, I think. I think Jeremy's referring to just other issues that may come up outside of it. Is that right?
Mr. Chairman, that's absolutely right. I just don't want to limit it in any way. My conversations with all the folks at Stadco is that they've got a lot of irons in the fire relative to parking and infrastructure and all those type of things. And as those come forward, if necessary, we've certainly indicated that we'll stand ready to assist wherever necessary and appropriate.
And when this concept first came to me, I was thinking about the fact that in our lease and development agreements with Stadco and the Raiders, the Stadium Authority reserved the right to step in the event that we are unsatisfied with parking. And frankly, the way that would work is almost exactly the same way this is working, where Stadco and the Raiders would still be responsible for any solution along those lines. This is just being done in a way that's proactive instead of reactive. So I think it's a very appropriate way for us to help facilitate parking solutions and not wait until there's a problem to have one. Any other questions? Okay, this agenda item will be back in front of you probably on our next meeting. Anything else, Mr. Guerrero?
Yes, agenda item number 11 is the sister item to item number 10. I won't go all the way back through it, but the concept is that there would be a licensing agreement or a subcontract that would also exist for exactly the reason that the chairman just outlined. This simply provides the form of that, which Mr. Arnold as well as staff will continue to work with the county and with Stadco to perfect and bring back before the Stadium Authority Board. Just recognizing that there are two elements to it. One, the agreement between the Stadium Authority Board and the county, and then second, an agreement between the Stadium Authority Board and Stadco. This is simply the second of those.
Thanks. With that, we'll open agenda item 14, which is the quarterly economic survey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Agenda item number 14, as the Stadium Authority Board has seen from time to time previously, authorizes, to authorize the Clark County Department.
Hey, folks, I'm going to break away
Finance
here,
to
but
submit to Clark
I just
County
want
Stadium
everybody to
Authorities.
know, I think there was a question regarding the, first of all, I went over some of the other agenda items later for further background, but in answer to the question regarding the Diamondbacks, the answer is no. There's not been a formal agreement to have the Diamondbacks come from or leave Phoenix, Arizona for Vegas. I read that yesterday. There was no formal anything from the Diamondbacks that's saying that they would do that. So no, that's not the case at all. And then this, I came in just a little bit late, but there wasn't any question regarding what the shortfall was actually. It was talked about, there's two funds. There's the bond debt service reserve, and then of course there's the Stadium Authority's budget in and of itself. If that was addressed, it was addressed really early on, and I missed it. I came in about 10 minutes, 8 minutes after it started. The only way for them to take that up is for them to take the entire agenda out of sequence. But they were on item 6 when I came in, so I know the items previous to that were short in their need for an answer. Let's go back here one moment.
Department of Finance to submit the Clark County Stadium Authority's quarterly economic survey to the State of Nevada Department of Taxation.
Ken Evans, so move.
Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thanks. Open agenda item 15, which is public comment. Any member of the public like to address the board?
Silence.
Seeing none, I would...
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Evans?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I did have two things. First of all, I wanted to compliment, this is a compliment, The Urban Chamber and several other the business organizations were invited to be part of a program called NFL Business Connect, which is a joint effort between the LVCVA here locally and then NFL representatives. So I just wanted to say that's another positive example of creating business opportunities for small businesses in anticipation of the NFL 2020 draft. So happy to see that. And then the other last administrative question I just had for Mr. Arguello is regarding the database, the 800 plus names in the database, has that been transmitted to AEG yet, or is it still kind of early in the process to do that?
Mr. Evans, it's a little bit early in the process. We've reached out to AG, let them know that it's there. They indicated that they're continuing to work through their process. As soon as we coordinate that, we'll make sure that we can get that to them and that. They know it's there and ready for them whenever they're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, with that, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Kent Evans, second.
All in favor, please say aye. Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
So there you go, another rousing meeting of the Las Vegas Stadium
So
Authority
you
Board.
notice that,
And
despite
no-
bringing your dog in.
there was news, but it was the kind of news that was very much inside baseball, right? And I'll deal with that in subsequent vlogs, not right now. But just wanted to make sure that was up and in place, and it is. I'll be back later with other news. Thanks.